with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, November 25th, 2019. Wow, damn, this year is going by fast. I'm Michael Brooks. This is a Michael Monday, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report, broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Professor Djene Bajalan from Missouri State University. There are protests happening across the Middle East, Iran, Iraq, Lebanon. Why? What connects those threads? Plus, the betrayal of the Kurds, every day it gets clearer and clearer. It had nothing to do with any type of dismantling of U.S. empire in the Middle East. Those forces have been redeployed to protect oil fields, among other things. We're talking about Turkey's latest moves and the Trumpian delusion across the greater Middle East region. Bolivia's coup government has named former President Evo Morales as a quote-unquote terrorist. Many people freaking out on Twitter that they have agreed to hold elections after waging this coup, but Evo and his party, the legitimate president, cannot run in them. So we are still on a coup footing. That's called a coup.
It's a coup, just simply, technically a coup.
It's just a coup. The military, even if they say so nicely, still constitutes a coup. South Bend's prominent African-American leader endorses Joe Biden in a direct rebuke to Pete Buttigieg.
Burn.
New footage of Pete emerges showing that his views of race and education are demented. 13 people have been killed in southern Iraq in the worst days of protests. Reports that potentially over 100 protesters have been killed in Iran. Hong Kong elections see pro-democracy groups make big gains. And Iran's foreign minister Jawad Zarif castigates the United States. The only thing we did wrong was not back down, which is, in fact, absolutely true. Donald Trump gutting the Iran nuclear deal. WeWork's founder was helping Jared Kushner craft a Mideast peace plan.
So that's why it's so peaceful over there.
That's why it's so peaceful over there. It's the worst company out there. White House turns up emails showing extensive efforts to justify Trump's decision to block Ukraine military aid. And Justice Department watchdogs finds that bias did not taint officials running the FBI probe, but there are errors in the documentation. And is Devin Nunes so touchy because he's involved in all of this stuff personally? Pentagon chief asks Navy secretary to resign over a Navy SEAL case. A Navy SEAL who was accused of war crimes in Iraq, as President Trump has granted pardons to several war criminals in the past several months.
Straight out of Central Casting, these guys.
University of Brigham Young University, Idaho, has been kicking students out of college if they take Medicaid instead of the campus insurance. Wisconsin governor signs a bill criminalizing pipeline protesters. Massive anti-democratic. And why are Democrats still doing favors to oil companies? Maybe because many of them are also the pawns of oil companies.
Also, I should just say, as the North Dakota correspondent here, there's a massive spill on the Keystone pipeline in North Dakota that is surprisingly bigger than the oil companies originally said it was.
And in related news, the Patriot Act has quietly been ushered back through Congress and reauthorized by Democratic leadership. All that and much, much more on today's Majority Report. But first, let's go to the UK. It looks like an uphill battle. The right wing of the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, a biased press, a corporate oligarchic class, a one-dimensional fixation on Brexit, even as Jeremy Corbyn has emerged with really the only workable position on Brexit, have really conspired to hurt Labour Party's poll numbers, even though if you could step back a little bit and think about this a little bit rationally, this Labour Party is the only thing that can save the UK from just full catastrophe. I mean, the UK is already in decline. It is not an empire, obviously. It is also not going to be Singapore or Dubai. Obviously, leaving the EU is a massive own goal, a huge undermining of its strategic position, but it also reflected, of course, the same broad populist anger that can manifest in smart ways or manifest in incredibly destructive, stupid ways. Trump, Brexit, all the rest.
Especially when there's no real left alternative. There
is a real left alternative in the UK. The Labour Party has put forward one of the best manifestos really of modern politics. You're talking about incredible plans on housing, climate, labor, wages, and safeguarding the NHS, which will be not only on the chopping block if the Tories get a full majority. I have no doubt that privatization schemes are in the works. So if you want Donald Trump, and believe me, there's a whole bunch of, you don't want to hear about United Healthcare or Oscar or Cigna or any of these other horrifying companies. If you're in the UK and you've managed to not have to deal with any of these to get your healthcare taken care of, believe me, you don't want to vote for Tories or Lib Dems and change all of that. And it's going to take a lot of thoughtfulness and a lot of effort because the deck is stacked in the Tories and the right wing's favor. I don't know why this happens. There's a lot of theories. The BBC and the British press in general has been virulently anti-Corbyn in the most vitriolic, personalized, dishonest, insane, and unhinged terms. I don't know why this happened. It was bizarre. It is a bizarre cut. And Boris Johnson should be getting this question every day because he's absolutely dishonest. He's absolutely reckless. And he absolutely will continue to be. I mean, that's what's incredible. He already has been a disaster as prime minister. He'll continue to be. Check out this clip. This is from the 22nd. I see.
They do it. They do 22, 11, 19.
Yeah, excuse me. I got a little confused there. Yeah, 22nd month of the year. Check this out. This double November.
It does feel like we've had twice as many months this year.
It does.
So, the first one is BBC Question Time from the 22nd, and the second one is BBC News on the 23rd.
But it's the same clip.
Hello, Prime Minister. I'd just like to ask you, how important is it for someone in your position of power to always tell the truth?
I think it's absolutely vital.
So there's laughter at the beginning of that.
Everybody's laughing because Boris Johnson is even known affectionately. I mean, there are a lot of parallels here. Even some people find him a super charming liar. Ugh. Everybody knows the guy lies a lot.
Yeah, so we'll play
there's
back
laughter.
Back here.
Always tell the truth.
I think it's absolutely vital.
While the Prime Minister faced questions on trust.
How important is it for someone in your position of power to always tell the truth?
I think it's absolutely vital.
No laughter. So look, I'm not going to go, full.
I'll just say is like,
it's weird. It's a weird cut.
I edit videos for the Majority Report every day.
Right.
It's very simple just to clip out a split second that might be a little bit more embarrassing for a candidate or not. And
you chose to do it.
And when you have constraints for TV, you can just say, oh, well, we needed to mark this down for time. So we got rid of that. But I think they're covering Boris.
No, it's literally 2 seconds. I think they're definitely covering Boris. And look, it's a classic case where you have a guy, and I don't think that, I don't know what, I don't, he was like a tabloid columnist, and he's a right-wing politician. They have tried to make Jeremy Corbyn as an anti-Semite a thing for years because he has a principled objection to Israeli apartheid, and he said a couple of tone-deaf things, and there's a few tone-deaf things, not many, frankly. He's also fought against anti-Semitism and racism in all forms for decades.
Yeah, but he liked an unfortunate Facebook photo.
No,
or painting.
Right. Versus the dozens of articles that Boris Johnson has put out, which, by the way, I don't, he was a friggin' shock jock tabloid columnist. But this barely gets any attention. And not to mention his actual record of empowering xenophobia, racism, and just pure lies. This guy was at the front lines of a Brexit campaign that said all this money that supposedly goes to the EU, yes, it goes to the EU, but it is more than up for in terms of the benefits of the UK economically. That can just get turned into the NHS. Please. And now he's saying that he's going to pump all this funds into the NHS. A lot of it is pre-allotted money anyways. And he's fundamentally dishonest. And if you elect him with a clear majority, you're going to have a bad Brexit, and you're going to have another round of austerity and all of the xenophobia and right-wing populism and bigotry that goes along with it. So smarten up. Friends don't let friends vote Lib Dem. And there's a unique opportunity with the Labour Party here.
It's just amazing to me. Haven't you learned the lesson about the Lib Dems?
I don't know. Yeah, the Lib Dems under a leader who is certainly more impressive than the current one. And by the way, that just means not totally. Are you kidding me? It's seriously.
Cameron is historically bad.
No, Clegg is definitely historically.
Clegg.
Bad.
Okay,
Nick Clegg.
Right.
Cameron was the conservative, but they're the same person.
So the Lib Dems, they're like the centrist Democrats, kind of, right?
If they had gone, basically the Lib Dems ran in 2009 in a few respects to the left of Labor, because the Labor had been moved so far to the right. And then Nick Clegg went into coalition with David Cameron, proceeded to reverse all of their pledges, and was a co-partner for 5 years in the most ruthless, grotesque austerity cuts that, they would go pound for pound against any. They self-greased themselves without an external, because this is what the Tories want to do.
Even though they were allowed to maintain their own currency.
You cucks.
Yes. Even though the Lib Dems were partners every step of the way. And they wouldn't do an emergency partnership with Corbyn to block a no-deal Brexit. They claim to be the force of social toleration and liberalism. They barely even pretend to care about economic issues and justice anymore. They don't admit it, but everybody knows they're to the right on those issues. They're supposedly going to be the voice on pluralism and the rights of the LGBTQ community and so on. But then any Tory defector that wants to join their party, even with the most loathsome anti-gay, anti-immigrant records, they welcome with open arms because they have no center. Ironically, the center has no center in terms of any kind of bearings. They are totally opportunistic. They have no strategy. They have no value set. If they get near to power, it will almost certainly be to empower and partner the Tories. And I guess, Nick Clegg would give a John Stuart Mill appreciation speech while he sent millions out of their homes and others to early deaths with Tory cuts. This new leader, I don't even know. She'll go on Question Time and say what her top 3 favorite Bruno Mars songs are or something. She's literally I'm sorry. Anybody can raise themselves in stature in their new positions, which she is not. And her background is literally, I think, as a FM radio programmer. And so this is we want to vote for a sociopath Oxford rich boy with a litany of racist, sexist, and xenophobic charges, who clearly is going to devastate the UK economically and from the perspective of inequality, than a cynical party whose main record in government is partnering with the Tories to radically increase poverty in the UK. And we all need to do this just to prevent a couple of decent Labour Party politicians who desperately want to do a green housing initiative and protect the NHS and don't want to be complete pawns to U.S. empire and occasionally speak out on a human rights issue or two. I feel like Trump. How stupid are these people? And he's down by 10 points? How stupid. How stupid. I can't believe it.
Their press is so terrible over there.
Their press is horrible. That's true.
Ours is bad, but theirs is definitely worse.
Theirs is really bad. When it comes to preparing your children for the future, there are a few better ways than helping them learn to code. It's easy to get started with BitBox. BitBox is a monthly subscription box that teaches real computer coding for kids 6 to 12. Every month, a beautiful set of app creation projects arrives on your doorstep, and each box comes with a new theme, like animals or robots. Kids simply follow the instructions on the project card and type the app's code on the BitBox website. Within minutes, the kids can build their first working app and play with it on any smartphone or tablet. Now, I should say, I looked, obviously, because I consider my skill set to be that of probably about a 10-year-old on technology. I played around with it a little bit, got myself my own app going. It's actually really fun, really addictive.
You and Saul should compete.
He would beat me. Our listeners can get $25 off of any BitBox subscription of $50 or more by going to bitbox.com/majority and entering promo code majority at checkout. That's $25 plus free shipping at bitbox.com/majority. Promo code majority. That's BITSBOX.com/majority. Use promo code majority to order BitBox today. Your kids will love coding. They will love coding, and you'll gift them with important necessary skills for a successful future. Quip wants you to know that Quip wants you to know that the one single discovery that matters most for your dental health. It's simple. That if you have good habits, you're good. That means brushing for 2 minutes twice a day and flossing regularly, no matter what brand you use. Quip makes that simple, starting with an electric toothbrush, reliable floss, and anti-cavity toothpaste. Quip's electric brush has a sensitive sonic vibrations with built-in timer and 30-second pulses to guide a full, even clean. And the Quip floss dispenser comes with pre-marked strips to help you use just enough. Since Quip delivers fresh brush heads, floss, and toothpaste refills to your door every 3 months, your routine's always right. And yes, shipping is free. Join 3 million healthy mouths and get Quip today, starting at $25. I love Quip. It is all of the things they said. It's incredibly easy to use. By the way, and the floss is not too tough either. It's smooth. You get some tough floss from the drugstore. It's like they're trying to hang you with it or something. It's really intense. This floss is smooth. It does the job very well. And of course, for me, I travel a fair amount. I love how easy the Quip is to pack. If you go to quip.com/majority right now, you get your first free refill. That's your first free refill at getquip.com/majority. That's GETQUIP.com/majority. Quip, the good habits company. We're going to take a brief break. We'll be right back with Djene Bajalan. Welcome back to the Majority Report. Joining us now is Djene Bajalan. He's a professor of history at Missouri State University. Djene, thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Michael. It's good to be here again.
Djene, tell me that one more time. My fault. Oh, he's good? Did everybody hear it? Okay, cool. Djene, my bad. You're here. Thanks for being here. There's protests that have been taking place across the Middle East. There's protests that have been taking place across the globe. They're all important. They're all their own stories. I think, in a broad sense, from Haiti to Ecuador to Russia to Hong Kong, to Iraq, it expresses dissatisfaction with prevailing regimes. There's plenty of dissatisfaction with our prevailing regime in all senses in the United States. I think in Latin America is extremely important because I think in some ways it's centering basically the complete failure and decimation wrought by capitalism and neoliberalism. And I think that that's very explicitly centered across Latin America. When we go to the Middle East, we look at Iraq, Iran, and we will get to specifics, but maybe even echoing Sudan. Are we talking, is the same central focus on the capital dimension? Are we also rejecting the sectarian failures? What is happening in these protests writ large, Iraq, Lebanon, Iran?
I think in a general sense, you can sort of link the protests that are going on across the Middle East to sort of a general discontent towards the neoliberal economic order, broadly conceived. So, there are a lot of common ties, I think, common themes that we can find in the Middle Eastern protests and protests in different parts of the world, and more generally, perhaps in sort of political discontent towards establishment elites, not only in the developing world, but also, in the developed world as well. So I think definitely these protests that are taking place in places like Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, part of sort of global trend in politics, sort of anger at the prevailing economic order, anger at political elites. But of course, in the Middle East, you have a number of specificities which give these protests a specific character. So of course, we can talk about the general themes which link these Middle East protests to sort of global trends, and then we can talk sort of about the specifics, about the specific political conditions that exist in each of these countries and how that's shaping the protests that are taking place, what kind of themes are taking central stage in these protests. So, there are definitely a lot of through lines with these protests and protests in other parts of the world. But of course, we have to understand those Middle Eastern specifics and, the specific history of what's happened in the Middle East in recent years in countries like Iraq, where you've had, devastating war, sectarian conflict, and in Iran, where you've had a kind of siege economy since the 1979, and how that's affected society, demographic changes, younger people growing up, in America, there's this whole okay boomer thing going on. Well, that's also reflected in the Middle East, where you have younger populations who are completely disillusioned with the political systems that they're growing up in.
Let's go to Iraq first. What's been happening in the past several months in terms of protests there, and how do they fit specifically in the larger Iraq story, taking it back to the Saddam Hussein days, the invasion, the occupation? What's the sectarian dynamics? What is this emerging from? What are the protests about?
Well, the protests began at the beginning of October. And I was actually in Iraq at the time, and I was in Iraqi Kurdistan. There haven't been major protests there, but, a lot of the same conditions that are animating protesters in other parts of Iraq are animating, are bubbling under the surface in Iraqi Kurdistan as well. So what we've seen is, people protesting, sort of organic protest, just regular people who are sick of the political order. The Iraqi government has responded to the outbreak of protests across the country in places like Baghdad, but also in smaller towns and other major cities. Just yesterday there were protests in Basra in which 5 people were killed and hundreds were wounded, and these the government has responded in some ways with repression, but also with some kind of promises of reforms, cabinet reshuffle, salary cuts to leading, to politicians. But these haven't really stemmed the tide of of the unrest. And, the fundamental issue in Iraq is you still have a country which is, economically in dire straits. I think, the official statistics, 13 million people are unemployed, and that's on a population of 40 million. And perhaps that number, is as high as 20 million. So we don't know exactly. And there's also the issue of underemployment or not being able to make enough money to survive. So we've had, protests breaking out. But what's interesting about these new protests is, of course, they reflect some of the specific conditions that have existed in Iraq especially since 2003. So you had the American invasion in 2003, you had the occupation, and you had a political system that was constructed based on sectarian divisions. Now, this sectarian constitution is not sectarian formally. It's not like Lebanon, where there's like formal power sharing agreements between different sectarian groups, but informally, various positions in the government are, handed over to different sectarian groups. So, for example, the president is always a Kurd, and then you have a prime minister who's a Shia and a speaker of the parliament who is Sunni. There's nothing in the constitution that says that has to be the way it is, but that's the way that it's worked out, because when the Americans came in, they basically sort of set up this power sharing arrangement, which means, of course, you have a political elite which has a vested interest in maintaining this sectarian system, because they can hold on to certain levers of power through their ethnic identity. So sectarian divisions in Iraq, which weren't invented by the Americans, these divisions have existed in the past, but have definitely been reinforced by the political structures that came into being after the 2003 invasion. And of course, many people in Iraq bought into these sectarian divisions. You had Shias moving towards Shia parties, Sunnis towards Sunni parties, and Kurds moving towards Kurdish political parties. But people are beginning to get sick of this sectarian politics. One of the interesting things about these protests is that they are explicitly, or at least important elements of them, are explicitly rejecting sectarianism, calling for a change in the regime and a move away from this sort of sectarian-orientated system. For example, the Shia majority in the country, many of them are tired of the way that Shia political parties and Shia militias dominate their life. For example, a figure like Muqtada al-Sadr, who was, gained a lot of popularity because of his resistance to the American occupation and as someone who sort of fought against the political establishment. Well, people are tired, merchants, small business people, they're tired of paying, informal protection money, to Muqtada al-Sadr's group in order to maintain his militias. After the war, after ISIS sort of reared its head in 2014, you had the creation of the Popular Mobilization Units, the Hashdi Shabir. And this is a kind of militia group, again, highly sectarian, with strong connections to Iran, which is, if you want to think of an analogy, they're kind of positioned like the Revolutionary Guard in Iran. They're not as powerful, of course, but this group as well. People are tired of it. Iraqis, the majority are Shias, but they too are tired of Iranian influence over their country as well. Just as they got tired of American influence over the country, they're also tired of Iranian influence. Recently, The Intercept published a large number of diplomatic cables which demonstrated the sheer extent that the Iranians had influence over Iraqi political parties, not only Shia parties, but, for example, the Kurdish political parties, which developed strong relationships with Iran, especially during the war with ISIS, but these relationships go back a long way. So sectarianism and basically people being sick of the political order in Iraq is one major factor behind this. But more generally, yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just on Iraq for one more minute. One of the things that's very interesting to me and very disturbing about the Iraqi example is you have, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost seems like you have this sectarian model exported from Lebanon, essentially. And I actually, I really think some people should look at some of the real dangers and limits of this model. In some ways, it can be very important because it can ensure different group interest, which is obviously vital, but it's also really undermined, broadening out democratic institutions and also creating mass-based delivery and dealing with corruption networks. Because there is a whole other part of the story that I think does actually show that across all of these very sharp divisions there's a 1% political class, right? And even if they're battling with each other, sometimes incredibly violently, this works for them. Shia, Sunni, and Kurd to some extent in Iraq, and Christian, Shia, and Sunni in Lebanon to some extent. But that being said, you have this sectarian dimension. Then you also have the other thing that happened to Iraq, which is that first you had the crime of the US-UK invasion, but then you had the next wave of crime, which was the Bush administration's attempt to make Iraq some type of, market utopia. So tons of people lose their jobs. All of the companies are looted for, American oil companies and tech companies. Obviously, this creates even more crisis and poverty. This is the Naomi Klein shock doctrine stuff. So to what extent today in Iraq are we dealing with an outgrowth? I think you very clearly summarized the sectarian dimension, but what about that shock doctrine dimension as well?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's, bubbling below the surface of these sectarian issues, there is the issue of corruption, which, corruption and privatization go hand in hand, right. The lack of public service. Now, the Iraqi state sector has not entirely been dismantled. The Americans weren't, perfectly able to do all this. And I'd make the argument, actually, that, the main objective of the Iraqi invasion in terms of looting wasn't simply Iraq, but was also to loot the American treasury as well. And the Iraqis were the collateral damage of that. But yeah, we have, we have this move away from sort of the welfareism of the 60s and 70s towards a policy that came to be known in the Arab world as infitah, opening. It began in Egypt, and we see it under Saddam Hussein with this beginning of privatization. But of course, this sort of continues on under the American occupation. So you have, basically Iraq. The Iraqi economy is sort of non-existent, just producing oil, pumping it out of the country, getting foreign money, and then sort of distributing it through patronage networks. And for Iraqi people, it's very hard to, when you go to an election, you want to be able to choose between different parties. And, an analogy I would draw is, people talk about American politics in the 60s and 70s and the fact that the Republicans and Democrats were so close to each other. It was difficult for people to have a real choice in politics because both sides of the political spectrum sort of accepted the same economic consensus and so on and so forth. The same thing is in Iraq. Whatever your sectarian background is, whichever party you vote for, they're all participating in this same economic system. And the country has terrible public services. Electricity is still not 24 hours a day. And, there were just small issues that drive people crazy. Baghdad is very hot. Now, imagine in the middle of summer, you only have 2 hours of electricity and you don't have fully running water, or you have to go purchase water because the water coming out of the tap will give you dysentery or make you sick at the very least. These things drive people crazy. When I was in Iraq, I spoke to my relatives there, shout out to Mohammed and Ibrahim. And, they were saying, we just feel like there's no opportunity here. Nothing ever gets better. Things in Kurdistan are slightly better than in the rest of Iraq because Kurdistan wasn't, hit by that violence. But, just the daily necessities of life are very difficult. In large parts of Iraq, you just can't survive. It's 45 degrees centigrade and you're in your house sweating. There's no jobs. And the only way that you get jobs is through connections. So right. People see the sons and daughters of the sort of political elite, traveling around the world, going to New York, going to the West, and they're still still trying to deal with those basic necessities of life, which is extremely difficult for them to deal with. And it's very often what triggers people into action is this sort of daily grind that they have to go through. And after nearly a decade and a half, it seems nothing is moving, or at least it's moving so slowly, and every time there seems to be a little bit of a progress, it sort of falls back down on them. So there's a lot of sort of anger and helplessness that's now sort of exploded into anger. And we have these protests which are sort of organic. There are different, it doesn't seem to be like highly directed. It's not directed by political parties. There is I would recommend to your listeners, there are two excellent pieces published by Ansar Jassam, who's an activist in Tahrir Square in Baghdad at the moment, and Shluva Sama. They published a piece in Open Democracy and a piece in Jacobin, discussing some of the issues that, people in Iraq are facing. The poor in Iraq, the vast majority of people, are living in this kind of this nightmare system where they don't feel that there's any opportunity for them to advance.
Going to Iran, and before we actually get into this, I think this is worth noting, and let's stipulate right out of the gate. Two kind of general questions, but let's stipulate. Of course, the Iranian regime has a very repressive internal security apparatus that people who have wanted greater openness and freedom, even in a quote unquote non-Western sense, have objected to, including national leaders like President Khatami, who's been severely sidelined, right? And also, that of course there is an ongoing and very aggressive effort from other powers, primarily the United States, to destabilize Iran, whether it be through just a relentless sanctions regime, which threatens a lot of Iranian people's lives, threats of war, and undoubtedly, it would be naive and delusional to think that there wasn't, covert action as well. So that in context, though, balancing that out, obviously, there's a huge amount of dissatisfaction in Iran, and not least of which economic. Iran actually is one of the highest Gini coefficients in the world, which is fascinating because the Iranian constitution, which emphasizes Islam and anti-imperialism, also has a very strong social justice component, and arguably more success on the anti-imperial and Islam component, very little on the justice component, with some reforms by Rouhani on healthcare and other things. He's kind of the Iranian Obama in a way. But putting that all on the table, what do you make of that? Just big picture before we get to the events of the last couple of weeks, in terms of what's actually driving what's happening in Iran. Does this echo the labor protests that happened a year or so ago?
Yes, I would again sort of reiterate your point. It is possible to sort of oppose American sanctions or American military intervention in Iran without sort of making the Islamic Republic into some kind of socialist, anti-imperialist utopia. I think there is sometimes a tendency on certain elements on the American political left to, romanticize these deeply oppressive regimes. But, we can sort of walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, recognizing, American policy. Well, not only is it sort of immoral or, dangerous, it actually in some ways serves to strengthen these authoritarian regimes. But yes, in a general sense, we've had labor protests in Iran, we've had ethnic protests in Iran, and this latest wave of protests is again sort of part of that sort of general discontent towards the existing political economy of Iran, the way that the economy is structured, who benefits, and again this sort of elite that rules over the country, like in Iraq, where you have a political class which somebody once described it to me as the worst political class in the Middle East. But, Iran has a political class which is very good at statecraft, has a long tradition of statecraft, have been very successful in executing sort of foreign policy. But domestically, things have not really improved very much. And, we have a long tradition of shifting towards austerity in Iran. Just as Saddam Hussein, the privatizations began under Saddam Hussein, we see hardliners, the so-called hardliners, and particularly during the presidency of Ahmadinejad, moves towards sort of more neoliberal economics. And in fact, President Rouhani in 2010 published a book, National Security and the Economic System of Iran, in which, he very much sort of came on board with the sort of neoliberal economic consensus, decrying sort of oppressive labor laws which make it difficult for businesses to thrive, talking about the freedom of capital so that small businesses and business people can be entrepreneured, and so sort of pioneered this authoritarian version of neoliberalism in the economy, which, has not really benefited the Iranian people. And so, the trigger for these latest protests was a 200% price hike in petrol. Now, petrol, a lot of commentators have said, oh, well, petrol is already subsidized in Iran, it's cheap. So, they've sort of framed this as ending subsidies. But, for most Iranian people, they're suffering from inflation. They're suffering from the fact that, they have to buy things that are sold in dollars using the Iranian currency, the rials, which are not very valuable as well. So you have sort of, again, this sort of neoliberalism. And of course, to bring it back to the Naomi Klein shock doctrine, the excuse for this is that, well, the sanctions are putting pressure on the economy, so we need to hike these prices in order to sort of pay for social welfare for poor people, which people don't buy. People don't buy that because they see the corruption of the regime. I think we've mentioned it before. They have this. They had these Instagram accounts, I believe, which were rich kids of North Tehran versus South Tehran. So right. North Tehran is the wealthy region, and South Tehran is the poor region. And you have these people living in luxury in one part of the city and in poverty in the other part of the city. And these people are all connected to officials in the regime who have access to the military, the economic resources that the regular population does not have access.
Can I ask you? Well, I want to. I don't know if it's a pushback exactly. I mean, it's not a pushback in the sense that it's undoubtedly true, and you can get into, look into the personal finances even of some prominent members of the Iranian government and the Instagram accounts, and the disparity is there. The disparity is there literally as in any other capitalist country, without a doubt. And we're also going to get to the reports of the killings and repression from the Iranian security services in a moment. But on the other hand, I think what I don't want to miss here, though, is that it's one thing if a government is under aggressive sanctions and the elite still reward themselves at the expense of a general population to some extent. That's undoubtedly happening. At the same time, the sanctions are so systemic and so relentless to the point of, people are not getting their cancer medications. Airplanes are not getting upgraded, so their fleets are more likely to crash. To what? I mean, I guess my point being is like, great, you shouldn't buy it from from any government when they say that, right? But just as in, is an extreme example, but I mean, and they have far less power as a kind of middle rank power than Iran. But if you go to, if you look at the demonstrations in Haiti as an example, there's a very deep understanding that, of course, the prevailing political system in Haiti and the political leaders, many of them are discredited and corrupt and venile and so on. But the whole system is predicated on a U.S., in that case, a literal colonial IMF, World Bank, U.S. presence, right? Now, Iran, obviously, is a far more powerful country. It doesn't have that same type of U.S. overrealm, but it does have relentless sanctions, which in a de facto way, the Europeans are following. The Chinese and the Russians give some business, but it's not enough to sort of make up for it. So not in terms of the response or the corruption of the Iranian government, which I think we can clearly both agree on, but in terms of the scale of the undermining of the Iranian economy and what's driving it. I mean, it seems to me hard that you wouldn't center the sanctions in that at this point because they're so systemic.
No, I mean, the sanctions have, been disastrous for the country. There's no doubt about it. But I think, people, I don't think there's, at least among many people in Iran, I don't think there's, any illusions about the United States. There will be certain people who look to it. But of course, people are angry because there are people within the regime who benefit from sanctions. If you have access to cheap dollars subsidized by the government, you can buy up the property and lands of people who don't have access to that money. So, there are people who are able to actually profiteer off these things. So, of course, the sanctions, I'm not trying to take away from the sanctions, but they've exacerbated and brought to crisis point a sort of a prevailing economic situation in the country. And there's a lot of people who are disappointed that the deal didn't go through, and now the Americans have reversed on it, and they're continuing living in this nightmare. And meanwhile, at the same time, they look and they see the Iranian government spending resources on, military adventures overseas, which may have a logical national security reason from the Iranian government's perspective, particularly sort of due to its geopolitical situation. But for your average Iranian, they're asking, why are we spending resources in all these other countries when things at home are in such a dire straits? And I think one of the so obviously, I don't want to take away from the impact of the sanctions on the country, which have made things worse. And from another perspective, they forced the regime to close ranks. At the end of the day, to draw an analogy, one of the biggest sort of boosts for the Islamic Republic in its early years was the American-backed Iraqi invasion. It allowed the Iranian regime to consolidate power over its population, to repress oppositions, all in the name of defending the country against external aggression. At the same time, the sanctions play into the hands of these hardliners who are able to mobilize a significant portion of the population around Iranian nationalism and sort of basically portray those people protesting as being the stooges of the CIA or the stooges of the Mujahideen Khalq, this weird opposition group that's backed by people like Bolton. So, the sanctions in some ways have a very counterproductive role if you're hoping to see a democratization or a better regime in Iran, because they, force that regime to sort of close ranks and adopt a more hardline policy. Yeah, I mean, and even that, just the MEK, it's such a perfect example, though, of like U.S., all of these regime change lunatics like Bolton, the conduit is this like terrorist cult type of group, with all sorts of accusations and allegations against them going back to the 80s, including them, participating on the side of Iraq during the Iraq-Iran war, and sort of universal contempt across all Iranian factions. And this is who Bolton and Giuliani and Howard Dean and, a bunch of people who, I mean, probably in some cases just got paid to speak for, it was just a good speaking gig. But before we go off of Iran, I mean, the reports are that a lot of demonstrators have been killed in the last several days. What do we know about that? Well, information has been sporadic coming from Iran because the Iranian government shut off the internet. I think they reopened it today, but they've shut off the internet to the country, obviously learning from the Green Movement and how those protests played out. But the violence, we're seeing numbers of between 100 or 200 people killed since November the 15th. And the repression certainly seems to be a lot worse than the repression faced by the Green Movement, because you have protests across the country in Tehran, Shiraz, Isfahan, Kazvin, Tabriz, as well as smaller cities. And, in the periphery of the country, in those regions, in Kurdistan, in Khuzestan, the Arab populated region, and in Baluchistan, state violence is, state violence against these protests comes on top of, already significant repression. And, it looks in certain ways that the Iranians have sort of adopted Assad-type tactics to kind of deploy more violence against the periphery regime in order to divide the movement and things like this. But as I said, previously, the regime, the division between reformist and hardliner is a lot less today because they feel the pressure and they need to, maintain power. And, a lot of people are hoping that that this will end in the overthrow of the regime. I am not particularly hopeful for it because, the regime still has a reservoir of support and it still has a strong military, and they are repressing, they're willing to use violence to repress these protests. Some people, like I said, are calling these protests, CIA inspired, but actually they're organic, and that's one of their weaknesses in some way, because there's no sort of clear objective for these movements, no alternative system. So the regime just closes ranks and represses them in hopes that the problems will go away.
And then when the CIA tries to come and organize them, become a disaster. I mean, that's sort of what the lesson is, right? Is you do have these organic. People don't want to acknowledge that. That's a problem. And then there is the CIA element, and then that becomes just a sort of CIA Gulf oil project. And
I mean, the nightmare is that Iran could degenerate into something like Syria, but in a country of 80 million people. That's the big danger. That's the big danger for these protests. That's
your phone agrees. Djene, we only have a couple more minutes, but I do want to touch on northern Syria and Turkey. It's been several weeks since the pullout, maybe more importantly, several weeks since a deal between the Syrian Kurds and Bashar al-Assad, and then also this sort of ongoing dance, primarily between Turkey and Russia, with the United States in the periphery, looking to guard oil interests, as they all are in different degrees. But what's happening now?
Well, the offensive is still taking place. It kind of lost a bit of momentum, but, just today there were reports that Ain al-Issa is under attack. It's a town in which there's a lot of refugees that have been displaced from this border region. So, the fighting in northern Syria continues, mainly with this sort of Turkish-backed militia group, which is, causing human rights abuses and is clearing out the region, not just of Kurds, but also of Christians and other religious minorities. So we have this kind of, we have an ongoing conflict. Meanwhile, Turkey is being very successful at sort of playing different sides against one another. Turkey, for its domestic audience, is sort of portraying itself as this, almost fighting America in fighting the invading Syria, and, being this Islamic power. It's also sort of making overtures to Russia, but when Erdogan came to Washington, he sort of mobilizes this discourse that we're an ally in the fight against terrorism, and the Kurds in Syria are run by terrorists, so we're fighting those groups. So, Erdogan is playing, a very successful game overseas in managing all these different factors, which makes these different factions, which makes his position quite strong. And, Trump has, acquiesced to a lot of Erdogan's demands. I don't know why, because, a lot of people around him are actually quite hostile to Turkey, but he maintains like this strong relation with Erdogan. And then, inside Turkey, we're seeing ongoing political repression. So opposition voices are being repressed in the country, people who are against the war. And of course, the HDP, Kurdish political parties, their officials across the country are still being removed.
Can you talk a little bit about, these are very important, the HDP, we've talked about it before, but can you give people just a minute? I mean, it's a very important political party, and now under Erdogan, some of the most important political prisoners on earth.
Yeah, I mean, we have the leader of the party, Selahattin Demirtas, who's still, still imprisoned by the Turkish government. And, his political party is being, forced out. And one of the important things about, what's going on in Turkey, about how this war affects Turkish internal politics is that, prior to the offensive, there was a kind of rapprochement between the the Republican People's Party, the main opposition party, and the HDP to sort of form a united front against the AKP, which is
Erdogan's party.
Which is Erdogan's party. And this rapprochement resulted in the election of an opposition mayor in Istanbul and in Ankara. This war now has sort of forced people to pick a side. And of course, many CHP people, there are a few honorable exceptions, such as the leader of the CHP in Istanbul, Canan Kaftanoğlu, who have opposed the war, but many of them have signed off on this. So this has made that rapprochement, that sort of unified front against Erdogan internally, difficult. At the same time, Erdogan is mobilizing all kinds of sort of deeply racist rhetoric towards Kurds. For example, he said, well, the region that we're occupying in Syria is not suitable for Kurds because Kurds live in mountains, and this is sort of flatlands and deserts, so it should be for the Arabs. So they want to basically, and they're sort of rounding up Syrians, these Syrian refugees, and trying to deport them. Now, I don't think they've started deporting them to this safe zone that they've created, but, they're invading Syria, they're establishing Turkish language schools, institutions, and things like that, and sort of imposing their guys on there as a prelude to hopefully, this is Erdogan's stated goal, to basically put 2-3 million Syrians in that territory and completely, it's really striking. Erdogan has openly stated his goal is to sort of ethnically cleanse the region and put Arabs in that region who are from different parts of Syria. And, this is ethnic cleansing and even genocide to a certain degree. And, the world is pretty much doing nothing about it. Now, Trump, talked about withdrawing from these forever wars. But, the reality is, he's just handing over this region to a NATO ally, allowing ethnic cleansing to take place, keeping control of the oil in a very naked way, keeping troops on that. So he didn't even withdraw from Syria, and then acting as a mercenary force for the Saudis. So, right. Trump often plays on sort of liberal hypocrisy, but people who think that this withdrawal is a withdrawal or anything to do with sort of winding down the American imperial footprint in the world are really, I think they're clowning about.
Djene Bajalan, I can't even ask the follow-up question because that's too perfect a way to end. Djene Bajalan, professor of history at Missouri State University, of course, frequent contributor on the TMBS Illicit Histories. Djene, thanks a million as always.
Hey, thanks so much, and you take care of yourself, Michael.
Care. All right, folks, we're going to go to the fun half where we got some sound to get through and some other business before we take our leave. I had a very full weekend, as did Matt. Coming back from Philly, and then a great event at the Jacobin on Friday, or no, not at Verso Books Friday night. Become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. That's how this show happens. Check out justcoffee.coop, fair trade, tea, coffee, or chocolate. And of course, today's show was also brought to you by BitBox. BitBox is a monthly subscription box that teaches real computer coding for kids ages 6 to 12. Within minutes, kids can build their first working app and then play with it on any smartphone or tablet. Get $25 off any BitBox subscription of $50 or more by going to bitbox.com/majority report, entering promo code majority at checkout. That's $25 off and free shipping at bitbox.com/majority, promo code majority. That's BITSBOX.com/majority, and use promo code majority to order BitBox today. Your kids will love coding, and you'll gift them with important skills necessary for a successful future. Tonight, we are actually doing TMBS instead of Tuesday. Illustrious guest, Nina Turner, and then Milton Alamati, the great Milton Alamati in studio. We're going to be talking about, in the commentary, Achille Mbembe, how neoliberalism birthed the far right, and can we reverse the end of the age of humanism? Then Nina and I are going to talk about Walmart workers and a whole bunch more, maybe even clown on the ever odious Pete Buttigieg. And then Milton is going to come in and we're going to talk about what NATO did to Libya, what's happening in Uganda. Of course, we've got to debunk a whole bunch more. Thanks to everybody who came out to Philly. Patreon.com/TMBS. Get the whole thing. Check out the Sunday episode with Drew Mikael from the ground in Beirut. What is happening there? And this Sunday, Megan Day on how the Green New Deal actually happens and housing justice for all. The incredible work of Bernie Sanders, AOC, and Ilhan Omar. Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. Patreon.com/TMBS. Jamie, what's up?
How can I ever compete with that? Well, I'll try.
Competition would start kicking in.
We all travel in our own lane here and lift each other up. I love Nina Turner.
She is my fave.
So this week on the Antifada, Sean and Andy go to the UK to suck some cans with the lads and lass of England's only podcast, Trash Future. Very funny podcast if you've never listened to it. They discuss the upcoming elections, the deep insecurities at the center of posh life, which are motivating Boris Johnson's political career, the Lib Dem and Chuck Cucks, and Corbyn's cheeky plan to nationalize Nando's and put Mr. Bean on the dole or whatever. And I only understood some of that. But if you want to understand all the wacky politics going on in the UK, check it out. They also released a bonus for our patrons on Friday. It is a real Lib Dem hours. Indeed.
God,
still with
suck.
Trash Future. And they lead Sean and Andy in a reading of James Kirkup's dystopian fanfic, How the Lib Dems Could Seize Power.
Ugh.
They clown on that pretty well.
Sounds horrifying.
Bunch of funny guys. Check it out. Patreon.com/TheAntifada.
Matt.
Yeah, Literary Hangover. Most recent episode is on a bit of prose fiction called Orinoco or The Royal Slave by Afra Ben. It's prose fiction on, I don't want to call it a novel. It's a very short story on dealing with themes of colonialism, slavery, race, and aristocracy, published by a woman and in 1688. Which is to say it's not exactly woke, but it is interesting that it deals with all those things. And we discuss it. So patreon.com/literary hangover. Or Literary Hangover, wherever you get your podcasts, or most places you get your podcasts.
All right, folks, we will see you on the fun half. I guess we will see you on the fun half. We'll see you on the fun half.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
That's some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 8s. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy!
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
That guy might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No. Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Welcome to the fun half. We're all here, and it sure is good to be here. I actually thought the IMs were signed out, but looks like they're working. So, cool beans. This is funny. Remember.
No, let me make sure this isn't the one where they put the Curb Your Enthusiasm music under it. So I think
those
that might
fools.
be.
That sounds
Give me
funny.
a second.
So, I will just say that, let's see. Okay. It used to be Sam Harris. That still happens. There's a lot of people who always go, no, you weren't fair. And I have no doubt I've made mistakes. And anytime I've ever made a mistake, obviously you try to correct it and fix it. That's part of the nature of, especially doing 3 hours of, or 2-3 hours of live show a day. You are going to make mistakes. But, there was a ton of like, no, that wasn't fair. And you said what I said. With Sam, the Andrew Yang people are obviously extremely touchy about getting their UBI to their landlord. And all candidates can be very, very touchy. And then weirdly, some people get super defensive of John Oliver and Trevor Noah, which is one is the most bizarre to me.
Literally, why?
Yeah. There was a period of time where I felt it was necessary to have a little bit more of an intelligent conversation about Elon Musk. And there were a lot of people, apparently grown adults, who found this extremely upsetting in such a bizarre, pathetic, and sad way that it proved the point of needing to do that content, because that kind of like weird hero worship was obviously really unhealthy. But then it became like almost such a pile on, and I can never compete with Azalea Banks clowning somebody. So I was kind of like, all right, whatever. And also, like, believe it or not, I don't wait. Like, nobody should be a billionaire, and we're not going to solve climate change through some, one individual person, no matter how supposedly brilliant. Once that point is established, I don't need to keep talking about the guy. So I haven't talked about Elon Musk for ages. And he's had several mishaps that I've chosen to not talk about since then, just to be clear for the people out here who are still, so emotionally wrapped up in this guy. But this was funny.
Sure? Yeah. Oh my God. Well, maybe that was a little too hard. Should we try the beer?
Oh.
Sorry?
This is not at the end of their presentation.
It didn't go through. So that's a plus side.
Let's try the right.
Try that one, really? Okay. Yeah. Sure.
This guy's not helping.
It didn't go through. All right. Not bad. Room for improvement.
Oh.
That was kind of cute, actually.
Let's watch it again, though, because it's very funny.
He's so hapless.
Oh, man. And that's supposed to be completely, like,
I don't understand.
right?
How did you not test that? How did you not know it was
They don't
go
have
like
the
that?
capacity.
Yeah.
It's like this small, like, shop that is, I mean, the whole fantasy about Tesla and Elon Musk. And it wasn't just like, yeah, this guy might be talented. He might be creative. So you put him in part of a bigger creative system, and maybe he could be helpful or maybe not. I really don't know. But the idea that this singular genius is going to solve all these problems is, I mean, it's first and foremost an economic, ecological, and political disaster for everybody, but it's also bad for him. I mean, why do you think this guy is losing his mind, tweeting nonsense and getting into stupid feuds and working too much and freaking out? Like, that's not good. No one can shoulder that. And by the way, even Steve Jobs, first of all, worked in a totally different environment media-wise than Elon Musk, both in terms of what he could get away with and also in terms of like not being like he cultivated a mystique around him, which was very helpful. And he also, I mean, look, let's be honest. I mean, look, computers and phones, and yes, it is absolutely changed how we've lived. There's no doubt about it. But it's also not completely fundamentally redesigning the energy and transportation economy. I mean, there's a reason that nut has not been cracked yet. That is more complicated at the end of the day. And he went through, like, I mean, I don't know. Steve Jobs failed out, got pushed out of his own company in his 20s. I don't know how much that would have been compounded by having the opportunity to be an idiot on Twitter. And incidentally, by their own metrics that they care about, Steve Jobs obviously smarter and more talented, in my opinion, than Elon Musk.
Right.
For as much of just a gargantuan gaping asshole.
But still, it's all like this myth of like lords of creation.
And that's also not how it worked too.
Which is like what Elon Musk is.
Yeah.
He's like the reason, like the big part of his job is becoming this meme that you associate with technology. So like I put the word up there, vocabulary word for today, impresario.
Right.
Like that's what Elon is more than an engineer, right? He attracts.
And that was what Job was.
Right, exactly.
Everybody said, look, at the end of the day, he's like P.T. Barnum.
But I mean, do we want to watch it again?
Yeah, let's watch it one more time. It's funny.
That is the model for progress that we have under capitalism, right? These captains of industry who are going to like make progress happen with their great ideas. So it makes sense that people who grew up totally inculcated with that ideology would believe that. But I am glad that we have Elon Musk out there being so visibly hapless, because he just punctures that that myth faster than that rock punctured that window just now.
Sure? Yeah. Oh my God. Well,
oh my effing God is not, I think.
Maybe that was a little too hard.
That, by the way, was really not that hard.
Yeah, no. If I wanted to smash a window, I would throw a fastball through that.
Yeah, that was a...
It didn't go through.
Nice
That's a plus
slider
Here's a lob.
over the plate.
Oh, really? Okay.
Here's an off-speed pitch.
Oh, man.
I mean, did these windows ever not break?
It would break at the wind. Oh,
it's funny because they had to still do a lot more like promotional stuff after that. So, like, for instance, park a four-wheeler in the back of it. But they had to do that with those broken glasses. So all the shots.
It's like a scene from Silicon Valley.
Yes, exactly. Colin from Nebraska. Mayor Pete's coming to Council Bluffs, Iowa, across the bridge from Omaha. I opted out of going, so I hope they don't count me as an attendee. Nice. Exactly. Retcon. Yay. Oh, the Majority Report. TMBS MR without the neurosis. Gregory from Oklahoma. Hi, y'all. I've recently done some interviews with some candidates here in Oklahoma. One of them, I'm super proud, is my interview with my friend Alex Scott, who's progressive on Norman. Oklahoma City Council, is running for state senate here in Oklahoma. Will everybody check out, what is the name? Was it Corn State Uprising? I think Green Corn Rebellion. Thank you, Brendan. Little Birdie told me that TMBS gets a shout out in the next What Do You Mean video. What Do You Mean puts out legit, very high production videos. Never Yang, abolish Silicon Valley, abolish engineers. Vaping Jamie, that's a good one. All right, let's take a call. You're calling from a 308 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Kowalski from Nebraska.
The great Kowalski. How you doing?
Oh, not too bad. Just running my niece to preschool.
Oh, nice. What's on your mind?
Well, since the holidays are coming up, there's something I've been seeing on Facebook that I thought I'd give your viewers a little more insight on, and it's people talking about the legality of the wealth tax and why it works.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people say that, there's no, reason behind it, why tax it, and there's basically a train of thought on this where it is actually quite similar to property tax. One of the reasons we have property tax is, A, it's a good source of income, and B, we don't want it to sit idle. And that's pretty much a good premise for the wealth tax, because basically you have money just sitting there idle, not doing anything.
Right.
It'd be like having a piece of property sitting there. The reason you have taxes on it is so that people use it for something. If it's going to be for conservation, you get it enlisted in the government program, or you build something on it that can make money.
Right.
For the same reason, you do not want money just sitting in a bank account somewhere. We actually want it out there doing something and putting it in the hands of working class people.
Yep.
It's actually going to be doing something. It's pretty straightforward. There's a whole lot of reason why that's a good thing. So if any of your viewers are curious as to why a wealth tax makes sense, that's why. Plus, billionaires are a complete drain and scourge on society, so yeah.
Right. Well, you got it. I agree with you 100%. Thank you as always, Kowalski. The thing that we do have to start thinking about is how are the courts. Sam's totally right about that, because of course all this stuff makes sense, and of course all this stuff passes muster, but the courts are captive to extremist far-right ideologues. So we're going to need to think of a strategy for actually dealing with that.
But generally speaking, you tax things you want to go away. So one of those things you should tax is capital.
Indeed. You're calling from a Skype. This is a Skype call.
Hello?
Hello. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, my name's Liam. I'm calling from Norwich in the UK.
Hi, Liam. How are you? What's on your mind?
I'm good. I did have something to talk. I'm glad you're on, actually, because I had something to talk about Kashmir.
Mm-hmm.
But then something happened to me. Well, something happened to someone close to me recently with healthcare in the UK, and I thought that would be more appropriate.
Okay. What's going on?
Well, my girlfriend had gallstones a few months back, and she went to the NHS, as most people do, and they had to put her on a 6-month waiting list.
Mm-hmm.
So her parents decided to pay private.
Mm-hmm.
Private is incredibly extortionate here as well. It was about £5,000 for the operation and $120 for the consultation, which was just the same as the one on the NHS.
Sure.
Anyway, a few months
You're just paying
later,
for speed, right?
Pretty much, but the speed was not that much better. It still took at least 3 months.
Right. Okay. Yep.
Right. Anyway, fast forward to today. Discovered she has a hernia because of the operation. So she needs to go back. She's now moved to Swansea, which is on the other side of the UK in Wales, and she went to the health insurance hospital there, and they said, "Don't worry, because it's a complication. We will heal. We will do it for free."
Right.
So she was pretty confident about that. And then the next day, they sent her dad a bill for £250 for the consultation and $6,000 for the hospital fees for the actual operation. And then they said, "Oh, actually, we will only pay for it if you come back and do it in the same hospital in Norwich." And even then, they didn't say if they would pay for it entirely.
Right. And as far as dealing with the NHS wait lists, and this actually, I mean, it goes back to the Blair era. If you want to lower wait list times, you put more money into NHS. There's nothing complicated about this. And if you want to put money into NHS, you vote for Labor. That's it. I also just want to say, somebody IM'd with a correction, and this is true. So initially, well, what the Lib Dems, okay, this is complicated, so I'm glad you're on the line. They ruled out a temporary government with Corbyn in a vote of no confidence to form a several week government that would block a no deal Brexit, and Corbyn would be essentially in that prime ministerial role for a couple of months at most, and it would just be purely on blocking a no deal Brexit. They did vote later on for legislation that would block a no deal Brexit, which was the second thing that that came into play, if I remember my timeline correctly. And now going into elections, they are, of course, refusing to run on an anti-no deal Brexit pact with Labour. I mean, that's makes more sense. I mean, look, they have a deal. Boris Johnson cut a deal with the EU. It's basically very similar to the Theresa May deal, as far as I understand.
It's virtually no different.
Virtually no different.
You can find Boris. There's videos of Boris criticizing the very thing, Theresa May's bills for the very same things which were in his deal as well.
Right.
And the Lib Dems are they're really not considered serious by any of the younger generation here. I mean, after them reneging on raising tuition fees, just all support for them has dropped. I remember even being on university campuses, and the actual societies for Lib Dems just disappeared. Just no one was interested in supporting.
But there
them
must
or
be
following
somebody. I mean, what is it going to take? We only have a minute, but I mean, do you have any sense of what it's going to take to reverse course here to get Labour in position to, at the very least, block a Tory majority? It's looking really bad. I mean, I hope the polls aren't. Maybe the polls are also underreporting the support, but it just seems like the relentless political war against Labour and some of the myopia and focus has hurt them.
I honestly don't know. I thought that it might be somewhat similar to how Bernie's doing and how he's trying to attract people who won't vote.
Mm-hmm.
And basically it just needs to be a lot of campaigning in university towns and just the north of England, just areas where there are Labour strongholds, because the smears on Corbyn they're insane. I mean, one of my friends who works as an estate agent, he supports Corbyn himself, but his boss apparently went into a rant about it because he thinks Corbyn is a communist terrorist.
Oh my God.
And it's like the smears they're just everywhere and they're unbelievable. And it's honestly surprising how most places get away with it. And I think the only thing which will really change is just youth population voting, because that's the only way I think we're going to change sort of the Tory stronghold areas. And also I'd say maybe tactical voting with the SNP.
Yep, that sounds exactly right. Tactical voting with the SNP, which obviously is also a pretty progressive force as far as I understand. So, yeah, that's what one should do. And I really hope that you guys pull it out, because I mean, it's just amazing that anybody would volunteer for another cycle of Tory destruction.
I hope so too, but there's a lot of gamins who just refusing to change their mind on Brexit.
Right.
Just before I go, there's just one more thing on healthcare I wanted to say. Because another one of my friends went private because of a waiting list, because he had to have some of his gut removed. And so when he went to the private doctor, it was the same doctor it was the same surgeon who would have treated him on the NHS. And because that was the case, they decided to bump him up, but it still cost him an extra £300.
Right. Private healthcare is bad, folks.
Private healthcare just can't exist.
I agree.
Even with the NHS, it just cannot exist.
I agree. I totally agree.
I mean, their whole business model is killing people for money. So probably shouldn't let them stick around.
People should look into what's going on with the Australian healthcare situation, because they've tried to introduce more private options too. And after a couple of years, they're like, wait, this isn't working, because people get confused and nickeled and dimed, and it doesn't work for them. And the private health insurance industry is like, we're trying our best. I think we like how the reforms have gone through.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, exactly.
It's more just free market mythology. Let's stay on the UK. This was a powerful clip. John McDonnell would be the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is... I don't know how to describe. I don't know what to analyze. I mean, it's like Treasury, but far more important. Really a broad set of power over domestic spending and domestic policy priorities. I'd say it's the second most powerful position in UK government. It's certainly the way it was under Blair and Brown. Gordon Brown had a lot of power. John McDonnell is another incredibly admirable socialist and progressive leader who really, these guys held this flame not only under Thatcherism and global neoliberalism, but really under just Iraq privatization schemes, the giveaways to the city under Tony Blair. And these guys really, really, really care about workers. They have a serious plan on climate. And John McDonnell is also not willing to take any bullshit. In this clip, Richard Dearlove, who was the former head of the UK intelligence service, who was basically MI6, to put it just really simply, they stood by the Blair government's total dishonesty about the Iraq WMD intelligence. And that Richard Dearlove was in charge of MI6 during that period of the Blair government. So let's watch this exchange.
Before we go on with the rest of the interview, I did want to give you the opportunity to respond to an interview that we did a bit earlier in the show with Sir Richard Dearlove, the former head of MI6, who said that he's troubled by some of Jeremy Corbyn's past associations, some of which he finds surprising and worrying. What's your response to those concerns?
Well, I'm not surprised. Look, this is a reactionary member of the establishment. So I don't think he'd welcome a Labour government of any sort, to be frank, and I'm disappointed with him, but there you are. Can I just say to him directly, I think he should spend his retirement in quiet contemplation of the role that he played with regard to the Iraq war, where over 500,000 people at least were killed. He was strongly criticised as the head of an organisation whose intelligence took us into that war. So I think he should have a bit of humility about the judgments he makes about individuals and others in the future.
Okay, some very strong words from you there, Mr. McDonnell. Now, I want to move on to...
Well, they were strong words. They were strong words. They were strong words from him, with the greatest respect. And if you look at the Chilcot inquiry, his organisation was strongly criticised for its role, and he was the head of that, and it had severe consequences, which we're even living with now. So I think he should spend his retirement with a bit of humility, quite honestly.
That's fantastic. I really like John McDonnell a lot. I would look him up a lot. I mean, obviously I like Corbyn, but I also really like McDonnell. And I think that that's perfect. I mean, that's the perfect summation. And I wonder if there's any idiots in the sort of British center who will say, oh my God, it's like Trump.
How can you say that?
He's delegitimizing the intelligence service because they stood by lies about Iraq's WMDs. Let's do another very damning. Pete Buttigieg is like the Lib Dems of the United States. I've decided. I think we all agreed, and did everybody basically agree in Philadelphia that
Pete's the worst?
Pete's the worst.
He's
Pete's
definitely worse than Biden.
Literally not a candidate up there I wouldn't vote for over Pete. I couldn't think of. Because this is serious, because it's not just, one, as Crystal Ball pointed out, there's something just so devastatingly depressing about somebody so young repeating so much pablum and bullshit. But it's also that, look, if we take some horrifying, depressing scenario like Joe Biden, it is anything besides Bernie's a setback, if we're being real. And then it's just a degree of setback. But Pete Buttigieg represents generations defining reassertion of failed hegemony and failed ideas. And I think that this is really important. I mean, this clip is from 2011. And these clips are not, Pete Buttigieg's record on race is not the product of somebody who didn't use woke terminology or needs to be educated on certain policy sets. This is somebody who actually has been involved in issues with regards to race, policing, gentrification, and here has an attitude on education that show that he clearly, sincerely, and horrifyingly wrongly diagnose things. This is Pete Buttigieg from 2011.
The kids need to see evidence that education is going to work for them. right? So you see a lot of parts of town.
That's part of the motivation.
Yeah, because you're motivated because you believe that at the end of your educational process there's a reward, there's a stable life, there's a job, and there are a lot of kids, especially the lower income minority neighborhoods, who literally just haven't seen it work. There isn't somebody they know personally
and I think that's
who testifies to the value of education. So yeah, you bet. You know, the kids need to.
So let's just be really clear, because I tweeted this out and I saw some people still get, I mean, it's amazing, honestly, that some people could be following me and still be so delusional. He is speaking about people, and I mean, it's a very, I don't know what the broader context of this question is, so I won't make it, let's say people from any community that are experiencing poverty and lack of social mobility, right? Let's say that's who he's speaking to. I would be shocked if it wasn't. I mean, this discourse was normal racialized across the board. I just heard a clip of Sam Harris saying something like this the other, like asking a guy if, doing it well at school was acting white or something. So the point is that the reason that people are having trouble at school and having trouble moving up a ladder is because the entire economic and political deck is stacked against them on a material level, not because they don't have positive role models. And by the way, not because also you don't go to a very wide variety of circumstances and background and you don't actually meet incredibly well-read, highly educated people, because there's a whole other subtext, and barely subtext, that we're confusing testing and accreditation with intellectual acumen. They might have overlap in some cases, but they're absolutely not the same thing. And secondly, and thirdly, education does not solve poverty. Poverty is a resource and distributional problem. And this is a scam that conservatives and neoliberals have been running for decades, which is that we can deindustrialize, we can totally hack the safety net, we can have no public provisions for housing and healthcare that are real, substantive, and sustainable. We can redline people, we can racially discriminate against them, we can box in resources, and then all we need is, and then of course we need to terrorize the teachers and the teachers unions, but we just need somebody to see somebody from their neighborhood get educated and do well. I'll tell you this, I know for a fact that you can hear countless stories of people from different backgrounds saying, I actually do know X, Y, or Z person who did do quote unquote all of the right things you're supposed to do. They did get degrees, they did do this, and now they're basically just swimming in debt.
Yep.
Yeah,
that's mainly the upshot.
Larger number.
That's by far the larger number. And then the last point, really quick too, is like, what kind of disgusting system do we have to be in that when you finally do meet? I mean, if you go to a private college or an Ivy League campus or even some good state university campuses, you will meet people who are like, I'm upper middle class, usually white, not always, but always upper middle class, if not rich. And they're normal people. They're not dumb. They're not brilliant. And they're there. And there's a lot of them there. And they work and they live in certain neighborhoods, and they got paid. They got trained in certain ways to take certain tests, and they got certain, recommendations. And then you will meet somebody from, like Appalachia or an inner city or somewhere like that is not racially, geographically represented. And you'll meet them and you're like, oh, that person is a fucking genius usually, and also lucked out because they had one guidance counselor, or like literally had absolutely astoundingly above average talent and then had several lucky breaks. So basically, all this is doing is, it sounds like boring, stupid pablum, but really what it is systemic and aggressive victim blaming. And there's nothing in this guy's record that I have seen that would attest otherwise to any other policy views. Now, look, that's a 25-second clip. So maybe the rest of the debate will come out and he'll say, we need to get jobs. We need to get healthcare. We need to deal with policing. We need to deal with racism. This is very much something that you need to sort of add in today's world because there's a million different clips floating around of people. But that one discrete clip, he said what he said. And that is a destructive myth in that 25 seconds, unless it was immediately preceded by, I would be a fucking McKinsey asshole to say.
Yeah, it's dangerous. And I don't know if Pete Buttigieg really has any beliefs to speak of, because he has pivoted around so much and shown himself to have no inner core. But if there's anything he sincerely believes in, it's probably the American meritocracy, because he is a child of privilege who jumped through the hoops and took the tests, and everything is set up to convince these people, oh, now you've earned the right to run the world.
Right.
Like, I've been through the gauntlet. I know exactly how it works and what it's like. And it really does. It can trick you, because you're like, oh, yeah, I'm working really hard, therefore I must deserve this.
Right.
There's more lines of evidence that Pete Buttigieg is a racist than that black people don't support him because they're homophobic.
Well, indeed. Without a doubt.
I just keep clinging to the hope that you cannot win a Democratic primary without black support.
I mean, I don't think he can win, but the problem with Buttigieg and what makes him a threat is that he can leave it so it's, capturable by the center in the convention.
Right.
Like, he's basically there to cap Warren and Bernie from running away from this thing.
Right. Although, again, he might be helpful to Bernie, so we'll see.
We'll see what happens in Iowa.
We'll see what happens in Iowa. You're calling from a 719 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Ned from Vermont.
Hey, Ned, what's going on?
Well, I wanted to talk about incrementalism today, if you don't mind.
Our favorite thing.
Well, okay, so to be clear, I'm someone who desires radical change. My candidate is Bernie Sanders, so let's make that clear up front. However, I'm beginning to convince myself maybe of the argument of incrementalism, and the reason of that is because the right wing has been so successful in implementing their incrementalism. Just when we've proclaimed them losing the culture wars over and over and over, here we are living in a proto-fascist state where women's right to choose is being trampled on all over the place. And it seems like they're losing, but little by little, they continue to chip away at our left-wing values.
I mean, I don't know that I'd see that as incrementalism. They've been pretty systemic and aggressive. I mean, they know, I think the better lens.
Respecting power.
Respect power, not incrementalism.
Right.
Look at how you wield power to advance your ends. Look at somebody saying, you're just not going to seat this guy on the Supreme Court. He's not going to get a hearing. Nope. What's the precedent for that? Fuck you, precedent. I mean, that's
you're right
what you
about
need
that.
to. You
However,
need to learn about.
They didn't give up right away when they lost Roe v. Wade. That was a huge blow, right? But I would say little by little, they conditioned us to accept their extreme
So we
abuses
should,
of power.
work to condition people, and I think that's what Bernie's doing right now is working to condition a new set of politics. But
and I would say Roe versus.
Yeah.
I would just say quickly on Roe versus Wade, I don't know that necessarily from an electoral standpoint was a blow to Republicans. I think, wasn't it basically immediately a boon to them?
I mean, I think
turnout?
it's been pretty good in terms of they know how to rally their base with it. Anyways, Ned, I appreciate the call. Thanks.
I mean, I agree with the general concept of, like, let's say we take decommodify health insurance. I think that actually does free up a lot of different, struggle. I think that helps in the struggle, but I think it's not incrementalism.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, if what you mean is, I think, like a kind of sense of long-term planning, I totally agree. But the Republicans are not winning because they're incrementalists.
Yeah, no, they go 110%.
Yeah, people need to
at all times.
Understand power. It's what matters. Everything else is a sideshow. All right. Let's do Bernie dancing. This was awesome. Looking very good and still steady upward motion in the polls. I would want to have that kind of run, which is that we're getting into the last couple of months. People are starting to look a little bit more, and you go through various flavors of the month. You turn back around and you say, who do we really want here? And I think more and more people, obviously with the serious policy commitments or, really dealing on the ground with serious challenges, they have the clear pick. Here he is.
Aw. Take that, Joe. Next one.
Let's do this.
Dance with every lady in here.
Dance with every. That actually, he's good. He's moving well.
And his mid-range jump shots looking fire lately.
He's
too.
dancing his way into America's heart.
Exactly.
Well, he literally did that. Was it a Rosa Luxemburg quote? Revolutions without dancing.
I can't. If I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution. I believe that was Emma Goldman.
So this is actually really funny. You notice how, I mean, Devin Nunes is just a horrible, just repulsive human being, in my opinion. Don't sue Majority Report, Congressman. And he's been really touchy in these hearings on Ukraine. Let me just, in the impeachment hearings, I'll just say I think, people kind of generally know that I sort of fall somewhere in the middle of this argument. I think some on the left who have a really important and urgent critique of the national security state want to talk about, in fact, why was there a transition from Obama to Trump in terms of some kind of lethality of weapons provided to Ukraine. I'm incredibly sympathetic to those arguments, and I absolutely think that this same that of course national security state or whatever you want to call it would absolutely be assembled against a president that wanted to actually shift U.S. foreign policy, and they would not wait till an actual act of corruption to do that. I mean, I'm sorry, I think that's just very naive. On the other hand, I think some people on the left are, why would we give a pass to Donald Trump? I mean, this isn't like Russia. This isn't a convoluted thing with some things that are worth looking at, but then also some unhinged conspiracy theories and a whole bunch of things, and we'll find out and this and that. This is the dude's made a call. We've read it. He held up aid for a political favor. That is, and even if you oppose the policy, that is a serious problem. Also, you have a president in Ukraine who has his own geopolitical considerations. He's trying to actually have a rapprochement with Russia and tackle some of the domestic problems in Ukraine. He's got a lot of people he's got to please. And of course, he's not going to go up against the United States. And of course, also, even though what Trump did was transparently corrupt, the Biden story doesn't look great. In fact, Biden's story is a perfect example of the swamp. So, but what is really important about these impeachment hearings? I mean, I think the politics remains to be seen, to put it bluntly. I think we'll see. He's obviously not going to get removed from office. So the question is how much does it give him some body blows? That hasn't happened yet. I hope it will. I hope it does. What we already know that is great is that it's monopolizing a lot of their time, and that keeps their energy away from all of the horrors that these people, the Miller story barely gets any attention. The just confirmation of this, terroristic white supremacy at the center of this White House and party. So that's important. That's monopolizing time. And then there's this ancillary benefit that Devin Nunes might be so touchy and weird at these hearings because he's directly involved in all of this nonsense shenanigans. This is Devin Nunes. Basically, what happened over the weekend was first Eric Swalwell basically brought this up at the hearing, like, hey, dude, are you involved in this personally? Then Lev Parnas, the lawyer, Lev Parnas' lawyer, who is the indicted businessman who was involved, I believe, through Giuliani with all of this, he is willing to testify that basically Victor Shokin, who was the prosecutor that was ousted at Biden's request, was ready to meet with Nunes in Vienna last year. Now, this goes back to Biden leaning on a prosecutor to get rid of a prosecutor, and also and how that could relate to. Now, again, I keep wanting to draw the distinction here. The whole process is corrupt as hell, and I don't think the United States should have the power over who Ukraine has in a prosecutorial position. Now, that said, my understanding is that Hunter Biden was on the opposite side in terms of the dirty people he was representing than the dirty prosecutor that his dad was going after. So it wasn't exactly synchronized. It's more just a multiverse of dangerous U.S. foreign policy, Russian meddling, Ukrainian problems across the board, and myriad different opportunities for corruption, some technically legal and some not. And then Donald Trump trying to use foreign aid illegally to get political dirt on an opponent, which is, I think, frankly, probably 5,000th on the list of things he's done that bother me, to be honest with you. And I do raise my eyes at some of the smelling salts around this, but it is illegal and it is fucking transparent. It's right there. And now we have the very pleasant sight of it's also making Devin Nunes freaked out. Here he is talking about suing CNN, freaking out with Maria Bartiromo.
Were you in Vienna with Shokin?
Yeah, so look, Maria, I really want to answer all of...
Awesome. Already good.
Were you in Vienna with Shokin?
Yeah, so look, Maria, I really want to answer all of these questions, and I promise you I absolutely will come back on the show and answer these questions. But because there is criminal activity here, we're working with the appropriate law enforcement agencies. We're going to file all this. Everyone's going to know the truth. Everybody's going to know all the facts. But I think you can understand that I can't...
It's going to be like the cow lawsuit part 2.
Yeah, I was going to say, to be fair, he is also suing a fictitious cow, so I'm not sure how much weight that carries.
All the facts, but I think you can understand that I can't compete by trying to debate this out with the public media when 90% of the media are totally corrupt. And because this is...
Now all of a sudden we don't believe in debate anymore.
Wow. The graveyard of ideas.
And because this is criminal in nature, and because it's so bad, it's so slanderous.
So bad. So bad.
We've got all the facts on our side, and we're going to file in federal court because I'm not going to sit here and try to compete against the media that I have no chance of winning with.
Thank you.
I will win in court, and they'll have a chance to cooperate, and they'll have to show how they worked with somebody who's been indicted, which is likely conspiring to obstruct justice.
So I want to just be clear before I move on. I got to get your take on the impeachment hearings, but just to be clear, you're saying you're suing CNN, you're going to sue Daily Beast. I know you've sued Twitter.
Sue
in the
everybody.
past. Do you think this is going somewhere? You're telling me that CNN committed criminal activity.
Well, it's very likely, or they're an accessory to it. Right? So none of this is true.
Sue everybody.
I said my statement is it's demonstrably false. We'll get to all the facts when it's filed in court. So, but somehow, they're either witting or unwitting of listening to somebody who's been indicted. And not only that, but it's their lawyers. So you're talking about third and fourth hand hearsay to do what? To dirty up the leader of the Republicans on the Intelligence Committee that just destroyed their complete narrative that they've been pushing, this new Ukraine hope they've been pushing for the last 2 months.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, that just sweatily looked awkward and repeated a bunch of stories by Newsmax that everybody laughed at and didn't answer the opening question from the segment about whether I'd met the person or not. That's hilarious.
He's lucky we don't live in like 50 years ago when there was 3 networks and they all could have just ran the video of Swalwell facing him, and him just sort of collapsing inwardly.
And him just collapsing inwardly, thinking about I'm gonna sue everyone. All right, let's play one more from Crazy Land. This makes a lot of sense to me. I normally don't believe anything about Rudy Giuliani. I think at some point that anything Rudy Giuliani says. But I always think one thing that's great that you can use with the Trump administration, and again, circumnavigating that discussion of how much do you balance between the specific emergency of Trump and the conditions that have led to Trump. Well, one of the smart things that you can actually do, and it doesn't cover all of it, neoliberalism led to Trump. Iraq led to Trump. Wall Street, 2008 led to Trump. Libya, in some respects, led to Trump. The CIA in Central America. I mean, there's a lot of threads you can draw here. Reality television, all of this stuff. that a lot of different people have written about and talked about. But Rudy Giuliani was nationally worshipped after decades as a authoritarian-leaning, barely disguised bigot, in my opinion, presiding over horrific police brutality practices, which he was paid to export globally. That was his first business outside. He went across Latin America and the Caribbean and helped export these techniques. Rudy Giuliani can be treated like a joke now by people outside of the far right, but he was worshipped by everybody when he was doing things like my police, pump somebody reaching for their wallet with a bullet, with 35 bullets, or, somebody goes to the police station, gets raped with plungers. And I'll do things like say they were no choir boy or even release their juvenile records to dirty them. And all the gentrification and all of the setting the stage for wiping out the working people and the deep racism of his policies. So Rudy Giuliani is a massive scumbag. He's a prototype of Donald Trump. And almost everybody, there's some people now like, Rachel Maddow wasn't on a national platform in the 1990s. I'm sure she thought Rudy Giuliani was an asshole. But plenty of people who had national platforms, including people who, oh, what happened to Rudy? Rudy's being Rudy. And I think this is actually pretty funny.
President Trump in the last week or two, have you met with him? Are you still his counsel?
I do not discuss my conversations with my client. You can assume that I talk to him early and often.
Yeah.
And have a very, very good relationship with him. And all of these comments, which are totally insulting.
Yeah.
I've seen things written like, he's going to throw me under the bus.
Right.
When they say that, I say, he isn't, but I have insurance. It is ridiculous.
Wow.
What do you mean by that, Rudy?
What insurance?
He should probably say that on Fox and Friends to make sure Trump hears it.
Exactly.
Are you an Oscar, Rudy?
Rudy, and so what he did was he told. All right, we just got one more quick story we're going to do, then we're going to take a call on IM, but we have to end around 2 today. So we're a couple weeks into the coup in Bolivia. Now, I've talked on, in Chile right now, you have security forces. There was just a demonstration of young people walking with eye bandages over their eyes that have been popped out by rubber bullets. There's reports of killings across the country in Chile. Of course, this gets no coverage, no attention. In Bolivia, post-coup, there has been myriad reports of killings, of death squads. There has been specific governmental decrees allowing the military to operate in certain ways dealing with protesters. There's also been an enormous resilience of Bolivian social movements, which is one of the reasons that there's still a lot of instability there and a lot of resistance to the coup. Now, I think there's a recognition in the coup government that they need to change the narrative because things have gotten a little bit too obvious even though they were already obvious if you knew what the word coup meant.
Not to the New York Times.
Not to the failing New York Times. So they have agreed to fresh elections. And this all is on the heels of new undermining of the OAS report about the initial elections. There is literally no, even the most generous narrative here for Morales is illegitimate would still actually put him at 43% over the nearest opposition, who is not even, as far as I can tell, in play. We have a senator from a party that received about 4% of the national vote who has become declared president through a military coup process. They're calling for fresh elections, and I'll get to this more tonight on TMBS, and we'll do this more on Majority Report. But the bottom line is, Evo and his party are not allowed to participate. Therefore, those elections are illegitimate, period. And this comes on the heels of Bolivia's interim government naming Evo Morales as a terrorist and threatening to put him in jail for the rest of his life if he is to return to Bolivia. So we're still in the midst of a far-right coup, period. props to Bernie Sanders and props to Tulsi Gabbard for being the only, and props, of course, as always, to Bernie for being first. But Tulsi put out a very clear statement. Props.
Also, AOC was good.
AOC, and of course, I believe Elon was the first, obviously. Yeah, AOC was good. Elon was good. It's a coup, folks. It's a coup.
It's a coup.
It's a coup.
Bother your favorite YouTubers about it.
What? All right, let's take a final call. You're calling from a 207 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey, are you there?
Hey.
207, what's on your mind?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey, I'm calling from Portland, Maine.
Hey, what's going on? What's your name?
And my name is Wayne.
Hey, Wayne, what's on your mind?
Wayne from Maine.
Wayne from Maine, bro.
Oh, yeah, Wayne from Maine. So I guess I'm going to say something that's probably not, very original, but electability and all of that nonsense. I was looking at the results from 2008 primary in Iowa, and the electability question had Hillary, she was losing to in the general to Republican candidate.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was caught off guard because I got disconnected. And
just tell us your thoughts. So anyways, electability is a bullshit metric.
Sorry. So that was 2008. That was before Benghazi, before all of that stuff, and they still pushed through the candidate
right
as a winning candidate, and now we have all the people on these networks that are her surrogates, and supposedly the people speaking for the left on the left-leaning networks. Only there are two in the country.
I agree with you, and Bernie, of course, leads in most of the polls. So Wayne from Maine, I agree with you. Have a great day, man. So, all right, let's take one last call. I'll try to sneak one more in. You're calling from a 405 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Gregory from Oklahoma.
Gregory from Oklahoma. How's it going, man? Last call of the day.
Yeah,
what's on your mind?
Good. I just wanted to call and say a couple of things. So on my show, the Green Corn Rebellion show.
Yes.
Someone didn't remember the name earlier.
Oh, Gregory. Okay. All right. I see how it is.
Brendan remembered.
So I did an interview with my friend Alex Scott, who's on the city council in Norman. Norman is the city that has OU, the college,
Yep.
And
Sooners.
She's running for she's running for the state senate. She's really great. She spoke at the Bernie rally back in, what was that, like September, whenever Bernie came out here. So yeah, she's a huge Bernie supporter, good progressive.
Awesome.
I did an interview with her, and I also did an interview with a guy who's running for Congress as a progressive out in the 3rd district of Oklahoma. So yeah, there's those two things. And also, I didn't get to call in a couple of months ago because I wasn't thinking about it, but it marked about in August. That marks a full 2 years that I've been watching the Majority Report.
Awesome.
And the Michael Brooks show.
Well, so, thank you, man. And Green Corn Rebellion, man. It's on.
Yeah.
Everybody check it out.
Thanks
a lot, Greg.
All right.
Gregory from Oklahoma, thank you so much. All right, folks, 2 IMs, and then it's usually, it's just it's tough when I have to do everything in one day.
I just want to do a quick reminder for our listeners in the UK. You have until midnight tomorrow to register to vote in the general election.
Do it. Save yourselves from this catastrophe. Vote Labor, and friends don't let friends vote Lib Dem. Jay Cool. Elon may or may not be smart, creative, or evil, but his position in the world is damaging. Hoarding that much wealth has consequences for every person in the supply chain, right down to the miners extracting the resource from the ground. Absolutely. It's a structural problem.
And it also misrepresents how innovation occurs.
Exactly. Okay. And it misrepresents. Let's see. All right. Final IM of the day. William F. Buckley. Anyone read Don Jr.'s book? It's rotting my brain. It's a Trump family bio with a bunch of right-wing talking points. Dave Rubin or Charlie Kirk could have written the same book. There's endless whining about him and his family being treated less than human. I doubt many MRR listeners are reading, but I feel the insights from his point of view is worth my time. Probably just wasting my time. You are almost
probably didn't write it.
Yes.
It would be great to get like a truthful memoir from one of Trump's kids, though.
I don't know if any of them are capable of that, except maybe what's the one that's not Ivanka?
I think they're probably not capable, because who really wants to deal with that level of trauma? Would be my guess. All right, folks. We're back tomorrow. Remember, TMBS tonight starting at 7. Nina Turner and Milton Alamati. Take care, everybody.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I get somewhere the choice was made, for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you?